Well, hello. This will give you a quick sense of how to trace a fashion figure. So, like most desks, mine is a mess. And the first thing that you should do is always clear off your space. Now, part of the reason is it helps you think, but it also makes sure that you're focused on what you're doing, and also make sure that you clear off any dust or any gunk. I have paint all over my desk, so you might see a spot once in a while. Okay, so first thing to do is really start by selecting your tracing paper. So the tracing paper itself, it comes in many different styles. Some people call it tracing, some people call it vellum. Um, and you can see here a couple different thicknesses. They all do trace. Some of them have different, what we call tooth, which means it's acceptance to the pencil itself. And for the process of what we're doing today, any tracing paper is good. But the one thing for all tracing paper that you're going to find is it smears. It doesn't really hold the pencil. So be really, really careful. Oh, look at that. I had two pieces. Okay, great. So I'm just going to use some kind of crappy tracing paper right now. And here we are. So this is a fashion figure. Now, when you look at these figures, you'll often see that they're intended for fashion over costume design. And you'll see that the figures are pretty elongated. Trying to move it towards the camera and it gets pretty shadowy. But you can see that it's a lot of heads high. The legs are extremely long. The torso, which... Yeah, okay, that's out of frame, but here, we'll probably see it. So what I've done in this case is I've sort of shortened the legs a little bit, and then what I'll do is I'll remove the torso as I go in. And I did that just by folding and photocopying. You can see the men's is just a little bit better. It tends to be a little bit broader. So what I'm going to do when I'm drawing is I'm actually going to accommodate it. And you can see here, when I sort of put these up together, you can see a real person and their proportions versus this fashion figure. You can see there that, she's a pretty average sort of person, and the proportions are a little bit better. Here we can see, watch out for the glare. I'll fix it, I promise. I'll promise. There we go. Even though they're jumping, you can see that their proportions are a little bit different. So I really like to make sure that the drawings themselves have a really good proportion. They look like real people. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I made sure my pencil was nice and sharp. I'm going to put a piece of cardboard down. I find that the texture, when it's too hard, sometimes the pencil ends up ripping through the paper, so something soft and a nice sharp pencil. Boing, boing, boing. Okay, great. So I'm going to put down my fashion figure, and then I'm going to use the one all the way over there. And then I put this on top. Now what I'm really trying to do... Oh, gotta roll up those sleeves. There we go. Great. My fingers look so stubby. Anyway, so I'm going to put this trace on top. And what I'm really focusing on is the proportion and the scale. Now, what I usually find is, this one's pretty okay, but the heads sometimes look like little walnuts. So often when I'm tracing in, I'm sort of gauging the whole picture. Now, right now, what I'm trying to do is round out a little bit. Make that fashion figure just a little bit more normal. I'm going to capture the dotted line down the center because that's always going to help me understand things. And then I'm moving the waist. If you notice, the waist is drawn on this figure is a fashion waist. It's a little bit below the belly button. So there you can see that fashion figure, and I did my first, sort of trace. And then what I'm slowly doing is I'm moving it up ever so slightly, just so I can make sure to shorten that torso, shorten the whole element of the body, So there's the waist. I'm putting down a line so you can, hopefully, maybe it's a little too glary, but I'm putting a line, and each time I'm lowering it and lowering it and lowering it a little bit so that I can make sure that the legs get shorter. Now, the big thing I notice when people are doing this tracing, do really light lines. If you think about clothes are going to cover most of the body. So the more light these lines are, the better it will be ultimately, because you're going to be erasing, and you're going to see some fun erasing events coming up. So I'm moving it again, tracing out a little bit more, moving it again, tracing out a little bit more. And if you notice, there we go, you can see that the proportion is ever so slightly different. A little thicker in the waist, a little shorter in the body, and you can see when you look at the foot where that falls into place. Now, I'm going to be doing a mid-1920s event on this, so I sort of play around a little bit with hairstyles and things like that. I capture the lines on the face so I know where the eyes, the nose and such go, and then I'm going back through and I'm sort of connecting those lines, the bust line, the waistline, so that I know where things are ultimately going to fit in place. And then I did the little ponytail for fun. But so little whited out, I tried to accommodate it, but you get a sense of it in place. Now, also what's great about this white underneath is now I'm working on a white surface. If I put that on top of the black, it would just be a mess. I wouldn't be able to see. Oh, look at that. Smudgy smudge. Bad eraser. Bad eraser. Hate that eraser. Let's move on to another one. Let's see if this one works better. A little bit better. A little bit better. There we go. Now, some people use like a brush. I'm using my hand, which just leads to smudgy, and I even write on it, smudge. And a brush sometimes, if you have a soft kind of cleaning brush, sometimes that helps to brush away all of the particles that are left over. Sharp, sharp, sharp. I like a good sharp pencil. Now, if you're using a mechanical pencil, sometimes that can be a little bit more tricky. Now, you know, again, I've done this a million times, so it's easy for me to go in and sort of reaccommodate where all of the lines go. So, you know, part of it comes from practicing. I tend to just sort of do eye sockets and a quick nose and a quick mouth. Gonna sort of sketch in a little bit more now that I'm away from that fashion figure. So that I can sort of see where those resting parts are. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down my piece of research. So this is just a cute little dress with a bunch of flounces, but the big thing to look at right here is, if you notice, there is a slight movement in the waist, but it's not a fitted waist. And then if you notice, you can see that there are a series of 4 tiers, right? So you can see that waist, how that's going to fit. And then you can see there's a series of 4 tiers falling off of that. So what I want to do is I really want to focus on the support from the shoulder down and how that all lays in place. Now, because I have that center line, I can take a look at where that little V cutout in the front is. And, you know, I sort of drew it in. I'm going to change it up a couple times throughout the course of drawing this, because I realize it's a little bit crazy. But based on that belly button, I'm sort of seeing that's probably where these tiers are starting to fall into place. And so I just quickly sketch them in, see how they're going. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like that. And so once I did that, I was like, oh, okay, that's where that tier really needs to start. And that's where the body is. So now I'm going to start to sketch in first that bodice, and now where each of those tiers go. Now, it's going to be a big mess, and that's okay, because I'm sketching it in. I'm trying to get a sense of where does it hit on the body. And you're going to see first that the center line goes all askew. But as you're drawing, you know, you're sort of guessing and sort of playing it out and figuring out, mapping it on the body. But eventually, hopefully, it will look a little bit better. So next, I'm sort of navigating where that little capelet is. So it comes down sort of to the center. And this is where I determine, ooh, I don't like where that V is going. So I'm fixing that up. And again, notice I'm not going back through and erasing all the time because this is just a sketch. And then I'm working on that cape, trying to figure out the fullness and its release on the arm. Now I'm going in just erasing a little bit. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go over to the other side. And I'm looking at those proportions. You know, see how it hits in relation to the knee. And now I'm going to start to figure out a little bit more of how that lays on the body. So you can see, you know, when we talk about fashion, we talk about this idea of ease, meaning that every piece of clothing has a little bit, every piece of clothing has a little bit of fullness from side to side. Nothing is fully, you know, pulled onto the body. And as we can see, this grazes over the body, so it has a little bit more ease. So what I'm starting to do is erase the human body under there and look at the proportions and look at where it's going. So now I'm starting to realize, oh, okay, that's where the tears sort of jet from the body. And if you notice, each tear is sort of inside itself, meaning it's like a reverse Christmas tree, right? It's not each one is getting fuller, each one is getting more close to the body, draping in more because it doesn't have the other fabric supporting it. And so again, I'm just sketching in lightly each of the proportions, and I'm like, oh, look at that one, didn't quite match up. And now I'm starting again to go in and create each of the sort of layers. And now I'm going to go back and erase some of the mistakes I made. We all make mistakes, and that's cool. That's why we have an eraser. That's why we have the tracing paper. And there's nothing wrong with tracing, honestly. We're going to talk about this a couple times as we're going through. People are like, I don't like, you know, I feel like I'm cheating when you're tracing. Well, that's how you understand the proportion. That's how you get it into your hand. And smudge. Lots of smudges. Okay, so sharpen again. Nothing's worse than a blunt pencil, and I'm using a medium soft pencil now. And now I'm feeling a little bit more confident, and so I can start putting in each of these tiers and starting to deal with the fullness of them as well. Because you see, the first one has some fullness, the second one has a little bit more, partially because it's underneath it. But really working on those proportions, because there is a lot of math there. And then, you know, sort of setting each of these up where is a little bit of kick behind them to give it a little bit more fun fullness. And you know, again, when we do these drawings, you know, if your foundation, and when I'm talking about the foundation, in this case, the bodice, you know, is done right, everything else kind of makes sense. Everything else kind of falls into place. And once you get those proportions and those shapes, then you can really focus on the stuff that is the fun drawing stuff. So now I'm just looking again at the cape. And notice that my line weight is changing. You know, each time I'm drawing, I'm building up that line weight. And that line weight, you know, we might say, oh, that's dark or light, but it's also telling me that once I've gotten to a certain point, I've accepted and I agree with it. Because the more sort of graphite that you put down, the more lead you put down, ultimately, you're going to have a lot more that you have to erase and more smudges. I'm just throwing in a little bob hairdo because that makes me happy before I get back to the legs. And so this fashion figure had relatively large feet, so I'm going to try to tidy up the feet so they're a little bit more proportional. Have a little sip of water. Always have a little something next to you. Makes things a little bit better. Okay. I'm obsessed with sharpening pencils. Okay, so now as I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's a little off. And I'm going to sort of throw my drawing away because I was focusing on that. Now I want to focus on the figure. I really want to focus on what I'm looking at there. So now I'm getting a little bit better piece of tracing paper, and this is kind of a David thing. I'm sort of going back over what I'm doing, but now I'm starting to get rid of all the stuff that kind of made me crazy, and I'm starting all over in a lot of ways with just a light line weight. I'm checking things to make sure I did it, and so you can barely see it, but I'm going in and really now looking at it again and realizing, oh, I made a lot of mistakes. So here I'm using my glue stick because I want those little edges to be nice and round. And so I'm using that to make each one at least the same kind of roundness. It's not cheating, you know? It's really just making your illustration a little bit better. My left hand looks crazy. It looks like a Muppet. Anyway, so now you can see that that's starting to round them out a little bit better, and it's helping me re-see what I'm looking at. If I keep drawing over the same thing, I'm like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? And now, in this case, now I'm just letting the garment itself tell me what it wants to be. Sketching in those lines, a little bit darker, going back in, cleaning up some face. And I like suggestive faces, especially as I'm doing this initial sketch. When I go in to render and when I go in to do stuff, I'll clean that up. But also put in a little bob. Most of it whited out. Can't quite see it. I think I bring it. Yeah, there we go. Well, small enough. But you can see it's starting to feel a little bit better. And even that one line is a little crooked. But I can always go in and fix that up as I go along. Now, we're going to sort of see how I transfer this to regular paper, and there are lots of different ways we can do that. So I like to have as few pencil lines as possible. I sometimes go in and just put like a little detail here and there, but if you notice, there's not a ton going on. I'm adding a little bit of fullness, something to sort of indicate that it's more flouncy than flat. I'm not worried about shadows now. That'll all come in rendering. That'll all come in, later times. Add a little bit of fullness down here as well. Mistakes. Smudgy. Okay. I'm not hating it. And here you can see sort of the different stages going from 1 to 2 and then to 3.